a clean energy. Welcome, folks. Today we'll be discussing the Clean Energy Implementation Plan reporting guidance. And my name is Aaron. I'm an electric and natural gas data specialist at the Department of Commerce, and I'm joined by
Austin Sharp here. I see a lot of familiar names. Nice to see everybody. Happy New Year. I don't think I've talked to many of you in the new year, so Happy New Year, and hope you and your families had a great holiday season, and really looking forward to this workshop with everyone. Take it away, Aaron.
Yeah, in case you're not familiar with the Department of Commerce, we work across many sectors, including housing, infrastructure and broadband, community services, economic development, and energy. And with our goal, with a universal mission to strengthen communities. And for our agenda today, we'll go over some background regarding the Clean Energy Transformation Act, Clean Energy Implementation Plan. As well, we'll review statute and rules relevant to the statute. We'll go over goals for the updated Clean Energy Implementation Plan guidance. We'll go over the Clean Energy Implementation Plan template development process, where we engage with Commerce staff and stakeholders. We'll walk through draft materials that we developed, and we'll go over questions, feedback, and next steps. So I'll pass it off to Austin to go over the background.
Great, thanks, Aaron. I think everyone on this call is familiar with our 100% clean electricity law, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which sets our state on a path towards 100% clean electricity by 2045. A lot of folks focus on that clean energy requirement or requirements in the statute. There are also a number of other provisions in the statute to ensure that that transition is affordable, reliable, and equitable. And as we go through the day, you'll see these different elements show up in the reporting template that Aaron extracted for us. We'll go to the next slide. Again, I think we're all quite aware of the three clean energy standards in the statute. The 2025 no coal requirement, which kicks in at the end of the year. Then there's the 2030 greenhouse gas neutral standard, where utilities have to use electricity from renewable or non-emitting resources in amount equal to 80% of their retail load. And then they can use natural gas or other fossil sources up to 20% of that load, so long as they use alternative compliance options to pair with the megawatt hours used from fossil sources other than coal. And then in 2045, we have our 100% renewable or non-emitting requirements kick in, where utilities must use only clean energy resources. All right, we can skip on to the next. In the statute, the legislature found that it was in the public interest that this transition included equitable distribution of benefits to households. The legislature noted that utilities must consider the non-energy impacts of their decisions, as well as assess the impacts of their energy decisions on vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities. There are standards set in the statute that incorporate the equitable distribution goals throughout the different standards. And then alongside those standards is a requirement in Section 120 of the statute for utilities to provide energy assistance to low-income households. That section, we commonly referred to as Section 120. It's something I think a lot of us on the call have been discussing for quite some time now. That is a separate set of requirements and separate set of reports than what we're discussing today in the clean energy implementation plans. So those are two different reporting requirements under the statute. And we'll not be talking about Section 120 today. The clean energy implementation plan process has been a long one, it seems. We concluded rulemaking in the end of 2020 that set out the reporting requirements for clean energy implementation plans. That was a very long rulemaking process, a year and a half or so, with everyone. That led to the first CEIP reporting template, which mirrored the rules that were created during that time. And then we had the first CEIP due on January 1, 2022. So folks had about a year to pull those together. And then Commerce aggregated those CEIPs from the individual utilities into a master spreadsheet. And we held 3 discussion workshops where we went through the CEIPs together, looked at kind of the aggregate findings, and we would also have 2 or 3 utilities at each workshop share what they'd done, how they approached the work, common questions they had, just a lot of different topics being discussed. We also, in the second workshop series, invited the investor-owned utilities, which have a different set of rules, different set of requirements under the UTC. But nonetheless, we invited them over and they shared what they had been learning and been doing for their clean energy implementation plans. And I think that was really well received by the folks in that meeting. So I highlight those workshops for folks if they want to go back and see some of the discussions that we've had in the past. And the takeaways from those workshop series, I summarized 3 here. First, I think there's a lack of a shared understanding of a lot of the equity terms and the way to measure the impacts of the specific actions that utilities take. And so we noted that. We also noted that there's kind of an inconsistent application of the demand response requirements in the statute, and it also kind of spread out across the CEIP reporting template. You'd have a lot of folks on one tab saying putting a 0 in for how much demand response they were planning to do, but they gave the impression that they weren't doing anything. But later on, you could go and find in different parts of the CEIP folks reporting that they were looking into demand response and other things. So this has been another area of focus for us to tighten up in the second interim CEIP. And then finally, I think we all through that workshop series realized that there's some significant opportunities for all of us to develop a shared understanding of the CEIP process during this interim period before the law really kicks in 2030. That involves kind of creating more guidance for this work, having a really healthy dialogue between the utilities, commerce, and more importantly, the utilities, their communities, about their goals for the clean energy transition and ensuring that transition is equitable, affordable, and reliable. And so I really appreciate all of Aaron's work that he's done with utilities in the state so far. He will dive into that to pull together some draft guidance and a draft template that we'll be reviewing today. I think it is a really great step forward for everyone, and I'm really happy to see that we got 59 people on this call. This is our first step, so Aaron will kind of be walking through the rules that we have in place and the laws, but then also the guidance documents, and really hoping people engage today, but also recognize this is not your last opportunity to provide feedback. We'll want you to sit with the documents, think about the documents, talk with each other, and submit public comments at the end. I think February 24th is our deadline there. And then we will pull that together and make any necessary revisions to the guidance and to the reporting template and publish that for everyone. We'll also hold a workshop, or maybe we'll just do a recording. One way or another, we will kind of cover the final template and guidance documents with everyone. So don't feel you have to absorb everything today or get started right after this workshop. If you are interested in getting started, knowing everyone has a different timeline, different set of deadlines, I do feel like we've got a really good set of preliminary materials for everyone to be reviewing and to be taking a look at. However, they are not final, and we'll be considering everybody's input going forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Aaron. I will be monitoring the chat, and if anyone raises their hand, feel free to ask questions as we go. If we get a lot of questions, I may ask us to hold them till the end of the different sections in the presentation today. So with that, Aaron, why don't you share with us the statute and rules and get us going.
Sounds good. Thank you for the intro, Austin. So we'll just do a review of the statute and rules regarding the Clean Energy Transformation Act and kind of lay the background for the Clean Energy Implementation Plan. So in terms of responsibilities for electric utilities, as Austin mentioned, all retail sales of electricity to Washington retail customers must be greenhouse gas neutral by January 1, 2030, and utilities must pursue all cost-effective, reliable, and feasible conservation and demand response. Electric utility must also ensure that all customers are benefiting from the transition to clean energy through the equitable distribution of energy and non-energy benefits, reduction of burdens to vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities, long-term and short-term public health and environmental benefits, and a reduction of costs and risks, as well as energy security and resiliency. And for the Clean Energy Implementation Plan by January 1, 2022, and every 4 years thereafter, each utility must develop and submit a 4-year Clean Energy Implementation Plan that must propose specific targets for energy efficiency, demand response, renewable energy, and interim targets. And this must be informed by a 10-year Clean Energy Action Plan, and this is in the resource planning process itself. Utilities must also identify specific actions consistent with the resource plan and resource adequacy requirements to be taken over the next 4 years to demonstrate progress towards clean energy standards and the specific targets. And they must also consider any significant or unplanned loss or addition of load that the utility may experience, such as vehicle electrification or data centers. And the rules reiterate the requirements for the greenhouse gas neutral standard for CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, but it clarifies that consumer-owned utilities must submit their clean energy implementation plans using a form provided by Commerce. It also talks about including a summary of the public input process and how the input is reflected in the specific actions the indicators, and other elements of the CEIP and the utilities integrated resource plan. And the clean energy implementation plan must also identify specific actions to meet the clean energy standards, interim targets, and specific targets. It also must identify each highly impacted community and vulnerable populations. The rule also says that utilities must report the forecasted distribution of energy and non-energy costs and benefits of the utilities portfolio of specific actions, including the impacts resulting from the achievement of the specific targets. So utilities must include one or more indicators applicable to the utility service territory associated with energy benefits, non-energy benefits, reduction of burdens, public health, environment, reduction in costs, energy security, or resiliency developed through a public process as part of the utility's long-term planning. It also must identify the expected effect of specific actions on highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations. It must provide estimated costs and identify if the resource will be located in these communities or if it will benefit them. And then the utilities must also describe how the specific actions in the clean energy implementation plan are consistent with the utility's longer-term strategies in the resource plan and clean energy action plan. The rule also provides a performance and compliance reporting requirement that also applies to investor-owned utilities. And the requirement requires that they submit an interim performance report by July 1, 2026 and July 1, 2030, documenting the utility's progress during the interim performance period and reaching compliance with the greenhouse gas neutral standard in 2030. So Commerce will create an advisory group that includes investor-owned utilities to design the reporting template for the requirements under the section. And it will follow a similar process as this and followed by a public workshop and comment period similar to this one. So it's important that the clean energy implementation plans are reported in such a way that utilities will be able to easily report their progress over time. And this kind of lays the foundation for the updated guidance to ensure that reporting is easy for utilities and tracking progress is easy for utilities. So for the goals for the updated guidance, we wanted to begin by building a shared understanding of potential specific actions, equity indicators, and equity metrics. That means defining the parameters for each of these. We also wanted to streamline data entry and analysis. So again, so we can ensure that utilities are able to report their progress over time. We wanted to refine the reporting tool to assist utilities with remembering their responsibilities under statute and the administrative rule. And we wanted to also understand and address stakeholder needs, whether that be the utilities or interested parties that are involved in this process. So now I'll go over the CEIP reporting development process. So undergoing this update, we had 3 main phases. We started off with commerce staff, and our main goal there was to develop a menu of ideas for utility-specific actions, indicators, and metrics. Then we had a consumer-owned utility CEIP advisory group where stakeholders could address and share their needs, concerns, and provide feedback on reporting materials. And now we have the public workshop where we clarify areas of confusion and receive additional feedback. So for the timeline of development with our commerce staff, we worked with a Climate Corps fellow, Amelia, to work with our commerce staff. And we started off by introducing them to the background on CEIPs and CETA, and we provide language settings. So we were working with the same kind of understanding of the requirements. And then we also then moved on to defining indicators. We reviewed the definitions, reviewed examples, and we had breakout rooms. And we started having these subject matter experts come up with examples for indicators that utilities could use. And then in July, we had focus groups for specific actions and metrics, where the participants reviewed definitions, they created examples for their subject area, and they shared equity concerns. So for our focus groups, we had 4 major focus group areas. The first was hydrogen and industrial decarbonization. The second was renewable energy and emerging technology. The third was transportation electrification. The fourth was energy efficiency and weatherization. The ultimate goal was for these subject matter experts to create a menu of ideas for specific actions, indicators, and specific actions that a utility could possibly take in their CEIP. Here's just a picture of our mural board that we had, where we discussed indicators with the hydrogen and industrial decarbonization breakout group. And here is a mural board picture of our discussion surrounding specific actions and metrics. And afterwards, we had a COU CIP advisory group that was composed of utilities and nonprofit interests. So we had Bonneville Power Administration, Cowlitz PUD, Grays Harbor PUD, Public Generating Pool, Tacoma Power, Seattle City Light, Northwest Energy Coalition, Front and Centered, and the Energy Project. And we started off in August reviewing prior aggregated CEIP results. We did a Rosebud Thorns exercise on reflecting on the prior CEIP process, what went well, what are some opportunities for the future, as well as what could have been better. And we also discussed goals and meeting logistics. During the first meeting, we wanted to clarify on acceptable specific actions. Utilities expressed difficulties with data wrangling and data management in the past, and stakeholders wanted opportunities to build out indicators that reflected progress under CETA statutory categories. They hoped to get more standardized language, clear definitions, robust indicators, learn from peers, and integrate CETA requirements into utility operations. We heard that they wanted a timeline for reporting, a framework for the CEIP, clear written guidance paired with the template. So during the second meeting in August, we reviewed draft guidance. We reviewed the menu of ideas that was created by Commerce staff, and then we received feedback. Again, utilities still wanted a process timeline of some sort, and stakeholders praised the comprehensiveness and helpfulness of the guidance. During meeting 3 in October, we defined the CETA categories. We reviewed the draft reporting template and received feedback. And during the third meeting, we helped clarify points of confusion in the reporting template. We added statute and rule citations to ensure compliance and internal reviews. And we discussed clarifying vulnerable population methodology and public engagement. During the fourth meeting in December, we reviewed the draft CEIP development process checklist. This came from the continued calls for a timeline of some sort, and we settled on a checklist of items that utilities could check off as they're developing the CEIP. We clarified specific reporting guidance items and received feedback. And now I'm just sharing some pictures. Here is a mural board where we had an exercise discussing the CETA categories that are in statute and rule. And this helped us understand how to categorize benefits from a clean energy transition. Through this conversation, we ended up adding an economic development benefit category because we saw it as an important benefit category that was missing and would help utilities understand some of the benefits that the clean energy transition can bring. Here's a picture of a Zoom meeting that we had. We had these Zoom meetings available on our YouTube channel, and we have it recorded. So if you want to review the CEIP advisory group meetings, they're on there. I'll do a walkthrough of draft materials that we developed. And we had 4 major draft materials that were created. We had the CEIP development process checklist that I mentioned. We also have the CEIP guidance. We have an equitable transition menu of ideas, and we have a CEIP reporting template. So I'm gonna share my screen now. Switch screens so you can see. I'm gonna post the link in the chat. This is the box folder where we have the CEIP reporting template and guidance draft materials. And we'll start off with the CEIP development process checklist. So as I mentioned, a lot of utilities wanted some sort of timeline for doing the work of the CEIP. We didn't feel comfortable providing a timeline because a lot of utilities are differing sizes. They have different processes, and we believe that utilities are the experts in terms of what work they need to get done, when they need to get it done. They're the experts there. But what we could provide is some help with consolidating the requirements in statute and rule. And so what we did is basically we provided a checklist of items that are required in statute relevant to the development of the CEIP. And that starts from the resource planning process, actually. So there are utilities that have to conduct integrated resource plans, and they have to complete an equitable clean energy transition assessment. Here you can see we provide a link to the relevant statute. And they also must complete a 10-year clean energy action plan to implement CETA at the lowest reasonable costs and acceptable resource adequacy standard. Utilities must forecast zero emission vehicle loads. They must identify 10-year cost-effective conservation potential assessment. They must establish resource adequacy requirement and measurement metrics. They must identify cost-effective demand response and load management strategies. So this just goes on with the requirements relevant to the resource planning process, including stakeholder engagement. And then there are potential opportunities for utilities to link the public engagement process with their resource planning process to their clean energy implementation plan process. And we'll leave that up to utilities to decide how that best works for their utility, but at least they know the requirements. And then here we have similar items for utilities that have to complete resource plans. And then for the clean energy implementation plan process, we have these various items that are required in rule and statute. As I previously mentioned, a lot of these are in the rules and statutes that I went over previously. Okay. And then I can pause for a second here. Do folks have questions on the development process checklist?
I'll summarize our chat so far for folks who may be on the phone, don't have that there. Ted Light shared a link with us that he uses and shared with a few utilities. So we'll take a look at that. Ted, thanks for sharing it with us, and be happy to take a look and share it with folks if it's helpful. Then there was a question about the timeline for these reports and the interim performance reports, which are the look back at what utilities have done after utilities submit these forward-looking reports for 2026 through 2030. They then must 6 months later complete a look back report for 2022 to 2026. And that will be a separate conversation, separate process for developing that template than what we're talking about today. But we are mindful that that deadline is coming around the corner in here. And then finally, for Aaron's, to highlight for Aaron, we had some questions around BPA, 100% BPA customers and what they're required to do under the guidance documents and in the reporting template. So if you could highlight that as you go, that would be appreciated.
Okay, sounds good.
That's all we had. So
I can keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the materials. So for the next document here, we have the CEIP guidance. So here we have an overview of the requirements and statute and rules laid out in a table. So we provide a reference to the section, a description summary, a short name. And we also provide extensive guidance on specific actions to ensure an equitable transition. And this helps the utility connect its specific actions to the equitable clean energy transition requirement. We start by defining key terms such as energy and non-energy benefits, the CETA categories. Here we define the CETA categories and see here that we added economic development to help encompass things such as job creation, training, and workforce development, investment in infrastructure like EV charging, development of clean technology and innovation hubs.
hey, Aaron, can you zoom in for us, please? A little bit.
Is that better?
That's good. Maybe you could hit it one more time for us. There we go.
All right. And then we also go over the definition of indicators. And in this framework, we provide a way of thinking that's similar to a typical strategic planning framework. And in this case, we draw a parallel between indicators and key performance indicators, which are sets of measurements for important long-term goals or objectives. And they can be tied to multiple metrics or a specific metric. And we provide example indicators such as improved community health outcomes, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase grid resilience. And we also provide definitions for metrics. So we outline the types of metrics, such as input metrics. These are resources that will be dedicated to or consumed by a program or specific action. Output metrics measure the direct progress of program implementation or specific actions. These are tangible or intangible products that result from program activities. And then we have outcome metrics, which refer to data that's collected that assesses the extent to which expected outcomes have been achieved. So outcomes are the changes in the community or system expected to result from a program or set of specific actions. And then with specific actions, we provided a framework for utilities to think about them and to describe them. So we wanted utilities to make sure they were describing a mechanism or lever for change. How will the utility conduct a new pilot study or provide certain incentives for demand response, for instance? What will change compared to the status quo? What is the scope of their action? So here we're providing an example. And then again, similar to a strategic planning process, we have a definition for logic model and theory of change. And then we integrate the equitable clean energy transition terminologies into the logic model framework. So we have the CETA categories here, we have the indicators, we have the specific actions, and we show how they're all connected. And so we show how through this diagram, how all of the aspects of the clean energy implementation plan, specific actions, CETA categories are all connected. And this helps utilities think through how they'll develop their clean energy implementation plan and their strategic planning process.
Hey, Aaron, can you go up that one more time and maybe just take a moment to walk us through this a little bit more? Because I think it encapsulates a lot of what you've been talking about so far.
Yeah, so the CEIP reporting template that we developed is structured similarly to a logic model. However, there are a few key terminology differences. So the first is specific actions are like the activities in a logic model. Indicators are similar to the goals in a logic model. Input and output and outcome metrics correspond to the same things in a typical logic model, but we recommend the utility provide measurements or metrics to be able to actually demonstrate their progress over time. So for the CETA categories, we can start off there. We have energy benefits and non-energy benefits. Within those, we have things like reduction of burdens of vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities. We have public health benefits. We have economic development. We have reduction of costs and risks. And then we have indicators, which are they refer to the progress towards important long-term goals or objectives related to achieving an equitable clean energy transition. So this could be reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And the outcome metric related to reduced greenhouse gas emissions, you can see that's why the outcome metrics is kind of a longer box and it extends to the indicator level, is a good example of a metric you would use for the indicator of reduced greenhouse gas emissions is greenhouse gas emissions owned and contracted. So that could be the outcome metric that the utility chooses. So outcome metric refers to the data that is collected to assess the extent to which expected outcomes have been achieved. Outcomes are the changes in the community or system expected to result from a program or a set of specific actions. And then in order to achieve the outcomes the utility and its community has chosen, they need to take specific actions. And specific actions would start with a verb. They include a clear mechanism or lever for affecting change. They indicate what will change compared to the status quo, and they describe a clearly defined scope that the action will affect. So for instance, the specific action could be fund clean energy projects in brownfields. There's a clear mechanism which would be fund, and the scope is clean energy projects in brownfields. And the input metric, these are the resources that the utility would dedicate to or consume with the program or specific action, and the utility can directly control these resources. So that could be securing ownership of at least one brownfield. That would be number of brownfields secured would be the metric. The output metric would be would measure the direct progress of the program implementation or specific actions. These are the tangible and intangible products that result from program activities. So this could be the number of utilized brownfields for clean energy. So this just gives an example of how the logic model or strategic planning framework is used for clean energy planning and how the terms are all related. And this would be, this is provided as a framework for utilities to think through their clean energy implementation plan development process. And then we go into a step-by-step process of applying this logic model framework to the CEIP here. So we encourage utilities to go through a public process to identify one or more indicators to represent what the utility's local community, including vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities, would like to prioritize in an equitable clean energy transition. And we encourage utilities to write indicators in such a way that clear target direction is described. We would like utilities to categorize them under the CETA categories described in statute. We then have utilities engage the community to discuss the outcomes that the community anticipates from achieving the goal. So the utility could think about how they'll measure the outcomes and select the top 1 or 3 outcome metrics for their CEIP. They could then talk about specific actions that are needed to accomplish their goal or indicator. So the utility could select the top 3 or 5 actions for each indicator. The utility would then group sets of related specific actions under program names, categorize them by standardized program types as provided in the CEIP reporting template. For each specific action, the utility should think about the inputs or resources that they need to make that specific action happen. And then they should also think about the outputs or products or results that they expect from taking each action. And then additionally, we encourage utilities to review the selected indicator-specific actions and metrics to ensure they comply with the rule, the equitable transition rule. So can the utility answer the questions in rule surrounding around equity? So we have questions such as, what is the forecasted distribution of energy and non-energy costs and benefits for the utility's portfolio specific actions? In other words, how will the indicator and its associated metrics look differently across the service territory in 4 years after taking the specific actions? What is the expected effect of each specific action on highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations? And we have questions around location, timing, costs. How is it consistent with the resource plan? How have public comments shaped the specific actions, indicators, metrics? What reasonable accommodations has the utility provided to reduce barriers? So this is just making sure that utilities are complying with the rule and they're thinking through these things and how it will affect vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities from the get-go when they start forming specific actions and when they start coming up with metrics and outcomes. So that's the guidance, and it helps provide a framework for thinking for utilities as they develop their clean energy implementation plans. I can pause here to see if folks have any questions.
Yeah, let's see if folks have questions. Thanks, Aaron, for walking through this. In a way, it's a lot to digest, but at the same time, I was thinking, your the instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, if they were all written out in detail, they would be quite long as well. So this is a detailed walkthrough. I think with all this, it's a process of refinement, and when people do have the opportunity to sit down and read it, and if they have questions about it, submit those. Feel free to just put in the document, track changes or comments and send it back to us. With those, we've aimed for clarity, worked as much as we can with the advisory group in shaping this document. It's very much informed by their input, yet, it's great to have multiple eyes on something like this and to get a lot of feedback. because people can read things differently, and what makes sense to one person might not make sense to another. So we want to do our best to get it as clear and concise as possible um, going forward.
Do we have any questions in the chat?
I don't see any in the chat, but James just raised his hand. Thanks, James, being a brave first person to ask a verbal question.
Hey there. Happy to break the mold, and maybe we'll see if the floodgates open. So James Dykes, Grant PUD. I was hoping that maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about what was lacking in the demand response potential assessments. Was it simply that there wasn't indicative amounts listed within the clean energy implementation plans, or were there issues in general with the demand response assessments that were being completed?
I think Aaron, you might be able to speak to this better, but my read on it first when we were sitting in those discussion groups was very much before the auditor had started going through and looking at the plans. And my view from the policy side was just that well, folks might have looked and saw no demand response there, that a lot of utilities were looking at it. My understanding of what the auditor has found in looking at it was that folks did not perform an assessment. They did not look to see if they had any cost-effective demand response, and therefore some utilities were deemed for that. I have not looked into the demand response assessments that people did under the statute, if they did them. So I couldn't say if there was a methodology issue or not. As far as I know, there wasn't. So it was just more an awareness. I think that is a requirement for folks to take a hard look at demand response in their service territory. And if that's not something that is cost effective or makes sense after an evaluation, then that's just the case. But if it is something that the utility should take a look at, then the requirements start to kick in to be setting some goals and targets around demand response. Aaron, do you have anything else on that? No, I don't know if I was responsible for your question, James.
Okay. No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the auditor just wanted to know more about the assessment process. And so we built that into the reporting template to ask more questions about how is demand response assessed and what were the findings. So they wanted some more transparency there, and we incorporated that into the template.
No, and that makes sense. I saw that in the template, and I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't something within the process that it's already been completed in 2022 for us, and therefore needs to be adjusted as we potentially contract out for an additional assessment. So thank you for the additional information. I appreciate it.
Hey, Austin, Aaron, this is Tom. You mind if I throw in a comment fast?
Yeah.
I just to help clarify what we've been out communicating to the utilities as we're wrapping things up across the board, really looking for an assessment, because the law says you must pursue all cost-effective, reliable, feasible demand response, looking for some assessment of the products that were considered as a way of evidencing you pursued all. How that shakes out at the end in terms of a target of an amount or a zero amount really is the result of that process. And so that's what we've been advising, is just start with a list of products, show that you've assessed them, however it is you assess it, get down to that assessment, document it, and have that support what's going into your planning, your resource planning, and then that tying to your CEIP.
Thanks, Tom. And in case folks don't know, Tom's with the State Auditor's Office.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Thanks, Tom. Paul Lovelace had a great comment in the chat related to, does Commerce or the Auditor's Office have a list of firms that perform such an assessment?
The auditor, yeah, we can't endorse anybody who does. I think among your peers, you've identified some firms that might do that. I would encourage utilities to get together and explore those options. But we can't, yeah, we can't direct people to anybody ourselves. So Commerce, I don't know how you feel about that, but I'll let you respond.
I
No.
understand that, Tom, and Commerce, jump in a second. I just was curious if it was possible to get the list of entities that performed those, because you obviously have copies of those documents that are part of the clean energy implementation plans that have been completed before. And therefore, it would simply be an aggregation of those to show the list of entities that have performed them before.
Oh, I see.
Not an endorsement, but simply a repository associated with the information that the auditor's office already has.
I see. I'll stop there. My brain was going somewhere else, and I'm not sure. James, maybe we can circle back together, and I can get a better read on what you're asking for. I'm sorry.
No problem. Thanks, Tom. Sounds good.
Yeah.
We have a few people throwing some names of consultants in the chat. So it just started, but Commerce doesn't. We might be able to. We would easily be able to identify who had determined, you know, that they did have demand, and were pursuing some demand response from the CEIPs. It would be a little bit harder for us to go any deeper than that without starting to go through the state auditor's stuff, which I'm not even sure how much of that is available to us at this time. So I think we'd be happy to pull that together, James, but I think the auditor's office might be of more help if they're able to. So
Austin, this is Tom again.
Yeah.
Auditor's office. Hey, I just wanted to throw out there as well, the list that of products that we've been recommending utilities consider comes directly from the power plan from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council website. So if you look in that most recent power plan, they have a list of demand response products, and we've been considering that as a pretty good best practice in obtaining what kind of products you might want to consider in an assessment when you're performing one. And if there's better ideas out there, by all means, but we've identified them as probably being one of the better areas to pursue.
thanks, Tom. All right. Aaron, you want to carry us on? I think
Yeah.
we're going to have a lot of, in a way, redundancy here as we go through these different pieces that it all builds together. So I think this will help us build a greater understanding together of what we're all talking about.
Yeah, and demand response is a good thing to bring up because there was a question around what's expected for BPA customers. Demand response is one of those items that that all utilities are required to do, and BPA isn't necessarily covering for all utilities in terms of doing demand response assessments, unlike the work they do for conservation. So that's an area that BPA customers might want to put some more emphasis or thought into that might not be covered as much by BPA, such as resource planning and conservation work. So here I'll cover the equitable transition menu of ideas that was created by the Commerce staff. So we have a front page here. Utilities can use this menu to facilitate a conversation with their communities on the indicators, metrics, and specific actions that fits the community's needs. And you can see the guidance document for additional tips and details. But here we heard from utilities that they wanted examples of indicators, specific actions, metrics that utilities could use. So here in this structure, it's going to look a little weird right here because it's the panel's frozen so that you can scroll across and still see the indicator. But the reason why it's structured this way is because each item is connected to the indicator that is on the same row. So here is a list of indicators. So here we have improved health outcomes, for instance, and that would go under the seated category of public health. And the first specific action that utility could do to meet the outcome of improved community health outcomes is establish air quality goals for all generation facilities and implement tracking and reporting system with an online dashboard, fund ongoing grant program for existing health program initiatives within utility service territory. A third action they could take is partner with industrial customers and community to fund testing of hydrogen combustion and share air quality data. Hydrogen is a renewable source of energy, but the combustion can emit nitrous oxides that could be potentially harmful. So that's something that could be monitored. An outcome metric could be nitrogen oxide emissions from power generation in highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations. This would help ensure that we're not worsening nitrogen oxide emissions, even though we're transitioning to renewable energy. Another outcome metric could be occurrence of health factors like hospital discharge. So again, these are metrics that are measuring community benefits, and all of the specific actions could help contribute towards these outcomes. And then we have this question around the distribution kind of language that's in the rule. So how will the indicators associated metrics look differently across your service territory in 4 years after taking your specific actions? This is an open-ended question. It's just encouraging utilities to think about their kind of the longer term impacts of their specific actions and their indicator metrics, and whether their efforts are being targeted in the right areas. So for instance, if there are a lot of fossil fuel power plants that emit criteria air pollutants, making sure that nitrogen oxide emissions don't worsen in those areas. And then we have other examples here. Let's see if we can find one related to I could provide one related to economic development. So it could be increased investment in community economic development, and this could be leveraging grant programs from the Department of Energy and United States Department of Agriculture for economic development in communities where transmission is built. Second action could create contract where energy developers pay into a community program or fund. Outcome metric 1 could be dollar value of utility investments in community facilities by facility type. Outcome metric 2 could be percent of clean energy jobs created or retained above county average wage. I'll move on to specific actions and equity. So Here we take the specific actions that a utility takes, and we make them the new focus in this column. So each metric is each of these columns is tied to the same specific action that it shares the same row with. So for example, here we have establish air quality goals for all generation facilities and implement tracking and reporting system with an online dashboard. This was taken from the previous spreadsheet or tab. And then utilities can elaborate, provide a long description. For the resource category here, we're referring to the specific target resource categories. So this would be renewable energy, this would be energy efficiency or demand response or other. Here it's more of other because it's more related to public health. Program type would be air quality and health. So we have a list of just program types that utilities for us to kind of see patterns across utilities. Utility could then enter its own unique program name that they have, just so that they know what their own kind of internal name for that program is. And then the input metric, the first one could be number of generation facilities with air quality targets. An output metric could be number of generation facilities that met or missed air quality targets. And then here we have a series of long form questions. Again, this is to help ensure that utilities are thinking about the equity impact. So what is the expected effect on highly impacted communities and multiple populations? Will it be governed by, serve, or benefit these populations? What are the risks? Will the resources be located in these populations? What's the general location? What's the timing of the specific action? What's the estimated cost of the specific action? What other benefits does the specific action bring that isn't covered by the listed metrics? And let me see if I can find another example. Okay, so here's a good example related to actually, let me see if I can find one related to demand response. There we go. Korean EV time of use and demand response tariff. So this would be a demand response category. Program type would be electric vehicle energy management. Input metric 1 could be estimated number of EVs and approximate location service territory. So utility would have to do some work to make sure they come up with an estimate of the EVs in their service territory. They can use that information to then feed into the program. The output metric could be number of enrolled households in this tariff. And another output metric could be megawatts of peak savings through the program. So these are direct outputs that would come from this program. So that's the equitable transition menu of ideas. And so I'll pause and see if folks have any questions here.
Thanks, Aaron. While we wait for folks, I'll just add that this is, I think Aaron's highlighted this, and I'll just highlight it again. This is not a comprehensive list. It's not a list of things that you know, the agency or folks are looking for in the CEIP. This is really, as Aaron said, a set of examples. And I think some of them may apply more and some may apply less to consumer-owned utilities, and some of them may fit well for some and not for others. But the goal of when we set out to create this was to create some examples and then be able to provide utilities a list of examples that could kickstart conversations with community members when folks sit down and do their public process with community members and give folks a set of ideas to at least start with. You might pick this up and say, you know what, we want something different than this, so let's, come up with something, but having this tool will first allow, some, examples to percolate, and then provide a way of thinking about all the different steps that go into setting a specific action and the equity outcomes and metrics that you will need to develop with the community once you set on a specific action or an indicator. And I think in the long run, this will be very helpful for folks when it comes to going back and looking and reporting on what the utility did do over the interim planning period. It'll also be a good way to keep track throughout that planning period of where you are with your specific actions and the equity requirements in the statute. So that's my little plug for this. Again, as with all of these materials, these are intended to be, none of these are new requirements. They are simply resources to help folks. And if they're not helpful, we think they can be strengthened. Let us know. If you just find them not helpful and need something else, let us know. But we're just starting that conversation today. So, with the broader public after it's been informed by utilities and advocates. All right, Aaron, I'm not seeing anything. Let's
All
move
right.
on.
All right, so here's the draft CEIP reporting template. Here we provide some background on the first slide on a lot of the rules and statute requirements again. We have a tab for contact information. The orange boxes here are drop downs. Right now it's on box, so you can't see the drop downs. Can't interact with them, but once you download it, you'll be able to use the drop down menus, and then utilities would enter in information into the yellow boxes here. This tab here is the targets that utilities would establish. So they have to come up with interim targets for renewable, non-emitting for the 4-year period. And then they have to describe how the target demonstrates progress towards meeting the clean energy standard. They have to, utilities also have to establish specific targets. So here again is the resource categories that are in rule. So we have renewable energy, energy efficiency, and demand response. So here we have the amount for each year. And this is the sum. And then we have energy efficiency assessment methodology details. So here, conservation assessment method. Why don't I go ahead and I'll go ahead and open the Excel document so we can see some of the drop-down menus.
Encourage folks when they get the document to look through the drop-down menus. I've put out some drop-down menus before where even left off some utilities on the simple utility one, let alone some of the other boxes. So Aaron's more detail oriented, he's got an eye for that, but things like that can happen, and then it's better to catch that early than to have to rework the template afterwards.
So just so we know some of the options here. So here under energy efficiency assessment methodology details, we have conservation potential assessment, a regional assessment, which could be done with the Northwest Power Conservation Council, for instance, or other. And then utilities could provide a hyperlink to their relevant assessment and notes. And then demand response assessment methodology. Did the utility conduct a demand response assessment? Yes or no? And then they can briefly describe their demand response assessment findings. Describe the opportunities for customer classes, which technologies were found. They can provide a hyperlink to the relevant assessment notes here. And then here's the indicators and forecasts. You can see that this is very similar to the menu of ideas. And it's a mirror of the same thing, except this one is blank. And so it doesn't have the examples here. But what the utility would do is they would fill out the yellow boxes and use the drop-down menus to fill this table out. And again, it's structured in the same way as the menu of ideas. So they could use similar examples that were there in the menu of ideas. And here is a similar table to the menu of ideas again. What the utility would do is they would have to refresh this table so that the specific actions would auto-populate. So just making reducing data entry errors and kind of reducing the work that utility needs to do to copy and paste this over. So there's specific actions that they fill out here would auto-populate into this table here. Once they hit data refresh all. There's again the resource categories: renewable energy, energy efficiency, demand response, and other. These again refer to the three main specific target resource category categories. And then there's the program type. There's a list of program types that we have, just so we can see patterns across utilities. And then program name, input
Aaron,
metrics.
could you zoom in a little bit for us?
Yeah.
It's a big spreadsheet that'll help us be able to see some less.
So here are the resource categories. These fonts are tiny.
Yeah, zoom in a little bit more.
And then here are the program types: apprentice program, aviation decarbonization, community solar, long duration storage. And if you have thoughts on program types that we might be missing or adjustments to these, we could also update these as well. And we have the custom, kind of the unique program name a utility can write in for their own internal tracking. And then again, the same questions that were on the menu of ideas. These are long form answers that utilities, to allow utilities to think more deeply about how their specific actions are going to impact specific communities, who does it benefit, and this will also make utilities hopefully think about like what input or output metrics they need to be considering to make sure that they know the impact on these communities.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Ted has his hand up. Ted, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Austin. I guess a quick comment and a question. So back on the targets tab, I noticed that if you, in the version that is downloaded for this file, under the CPA assessment method, the text box isn't quite big enough to see the explanation there. And because of how the spreadsheet is locked, I can't resize it. It's further down under the conservation potential assessment method. You can see there, it's if you select other, please, so you can't, I don't think, at least I couldn't resize that box, so maybe make that a little bit bigger in your version.
Oh yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, that's weird.
The question I had was more on the demand response assessment methodology. CETA allows smaller utilities to do kind of that like regional proportion method for the conservation potential assessments. But there's nothing really specifically called out for along those lines for demand response. Do you have any thoughts, opinions, or I don't know if Tom does, about whether like a similar kind of shared approach for smaller utilities would be allowed?
This time, I don't have an answer to you, Ted, on that. I think we want to recognize the position the small utilities are in, as well as, make sure that we are meeting the intent and requirements in the statute. So we'll take that back and think about that and get back with you and include that in the guidance document.
Great, thank you.
These are great observations. One about, the functionality, how it works for people, as well as great questions about doing the work. So it's that. Blake.
Yeah, Blake Shear with Benton PUD. Yeah, scrolling to the top on the, calculating your percent clean. Within the guidance document, you put an interesting question in there that said that utilities need to consider if they're load following how the utility plans to cover the 3 to 10% of BPA's fuel mix that is unspecified. And to me, that's the question that somebody was asking at the very beginning. If you're 100% Bonneville customer and they have 4% non-clean, then you have 4% non-clean. So what does Commerce or the auditor expect the utility to do in 2045? It's an interesting question, but what's your answer of what we should do?
Yeah, and if I could dovetail off what Blake said, this is James from Grant. It seems interesting that the state policy could have any say over a federal entity, and when they have no jurisdiction thereof. So there is kind of this interesting dynamic that Blake is speaking to.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first of all, sticking to the template in the 4 years here, this is an interim compliance period. Utilities do not need to be they're not required to reach the 2030 80% renewable non-emitting and then the 20% offset. They're not required to do that until 2030. We'll have to take a look at our guidance and the wording there to make sure that that's clear. I think if it's in the guidance, what it's trying to prompt is, as you get to 2030, what's your plan to comply with the statute once you start in 2030, and motivate folks to think about how they're going to get started once 2030 hits. We don't want folks to not be prepared. So I think that's the goal, that statement. The question is around 2045 in Bonneville. And the compliance there will need, Bonneville's mix to move to being 100% clean by that time. 2045 is 20 years away. Bonneville is well aware of the policies in the region. I know everyone on their last CEIPs was putting in, participate in the 2028 contract discussions and everything. And so that will be an ongoing discussion for the region and Bonneville and to an extent the state for how to comply with that provision. Fortunately, we do not need to tackle that to complete the CEIP this time. but
Thank you.
but we'll take a look at that guidance in particular and make sure that that's clear for folks, and we don't want to be suggesting something that's not required at this interim period. So good questions.
If there are actions that utilities could take that they need to take to buy RECs to cover that 20% to that needs to be offset, then that's something a utility should start thinking about. So maybe the guidance there is encouraging utilities to think about if they need to start looking for RECs. And if they need to do that anytime soon. All right. So I'll cover the remaining tabs here. So for this spreadsheet right here, we have highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations. Highly impacted communities is a community designation that is designated by the Department of Health using their environmental health disparities map. And I have a link here to instructions on how to identify highly impacted communities on their website and the map itself. They have an Excel sheet available with for the utilities and the ratings there. And so here's
Aaron, for a second, could you in walking through this slide, introduce us to highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations? I think we've thrown those terms out, but haven't really walked through the definitions or how you go about identifying those. And I think there's a fair amount of confusion about these two terms.
so environmental highly impacted communities is a designation made by the Department of Health, and is composed of various factors regarding vulnerability and risk. So here you can see there's diesel pollution and disproportionate impact. There's also social vulnerability. So they look at various factors and create like an index, which is the environmental health disparities kind of factors. So highly impacted communities are those that have a ranking of 9 or 10 when they take into account all these various factors. So here they have lead exposure, race, ethnicity, language, household composition, and disability. And so you can find more information on their website here. Here's the instructions. It also covers areas that are covered or partially covered by Indian country. There's probably a more general description on their website about the environmental health disparities map, but this one is more catered towards utilities and talks about the data table that they have here and the map.
So I think for this, I think the key thing for today's conversation is that this is something that's set out by the Department of Health. It's an aggregation. You can go and relatively easily, figure out who meets these requirements in your service territory. And that's different from vulnerable populations. So Aaron, maybe you want to go back to the template and discuss vulnerable populations.
Yeah, so here in this, before I move on to that, here in this new template, we ask utilities kind of more higher level questions in the previous template, we had people list out all of the zip codes that were identified as highly impacted. And here we just kind of ask utilities, we want utilities to think a little deeper about the results that they see. So here we ask for the number of census tracts that are highly impacted communities, rank 9 or 10, number of census tracts that are in Indian country, the average rank for their service territory, what are the top 1 to 3 environmental health disparity factors in your highly impacted communities, what are the rankings for these EHD factors and the associated metrics. Just writing down general observations. So these are things that utilities can think about. If there's more environmental exposures in the utilities service territory, they might have actions that are more kind of environmentally focused, criteria, air pollutant focused, or things like that. But if there's socioeconomic factors, maybe they can look into community investments, more economic development related actions. So this goes on to the last question here. How do your plan specific actions address the environmental health disparities factors for highly impacted communities if applicable? So again, just encouraging utilities to not just list the results, but look at the results and think about it and incorporate it into their strategic planning process.
Yeah, not to jump in, Aaron, but I think too, what I really appreciate about the layout here is that it helps folks think through what their specific actions can be and where they need to be, how they can be addressing the root issues and the environmental health disparities map. Last time, I think people were very confused because they would put the number they had in the zip code or the county, and but not really being able to connect their specific action and their and what they should be doing about that number, if there's anything they can do. And sometimes that, if applicable there, sometimes there's particular things in there that are very difficult for utilities to address. But there you can have some creative thinking, and utilities are key pillars in our communities. And so there typically are some sort of actions to help the local community. And so breaking it out helps, I think, the thought process and in getting at the CEIP that is thorough through and through by the time it's done. So appreciate this section there.
Yeah, we're hoping that you know, we're making utilities do less busy work and doing work that is meaningful for their communities and can help benefit their communities. So not trying to create more work, but trying to allow utilities to help guide them through meaningful work and being able to do some thoughtful planning here and less busy work. So here, vulnerable populations, these are in the statute, this is a classification that utilities have to work with their communities to create. So vulnerable populations are defined by a public process that the utility engages with their community, and it can be composed of various factors, socioeconomic factors such as unemployment, high housing, transportation costs, access to food and healthcare, low birth weight, higher rates of hospitalization. So here we ask, please describe how your utility identified vulnerable populations through a public process as required by statute. How does your utilities plan specific actions address the vulnerable population factors, if applicable? Again, kind of allowing utilities to describe their thought process. And then we have the factor categories. So we have This is taken from kind of the analysis from the previous round, just the various factors that were used by utilities. Utilities can list the factors that they used, and some details, the source of the factor, the date it was last updated, and they can describe any changes from their previous clean energy implementation plan. Okay. Then we have public participation, just asking utilities to provide a summary of the barriers to public participation, the public participation process, how the utility addressed barriers to participation, how the public comments are reflected in the specific actions.
Aaron, can you zoom in on this one?
Yeah. They're just asking about the utilities, public participation, engagement, and how it's incorporated in the utilities CEIP planning process. Then we have long-term plans. So this refers to integrated resource plans and resource plans. How the specific actions are consistent with the resource plan and clean energy action plan, and you can provide a hyperlink to those resources. And here we're asking questions about resource adequacy. Even though previously in the IRP, only IRP utilities were required to provide resource adequacy standards, and the CEIP is required of all utilities to adopt a resource adequacy standard and establish that in the CEIP if they haven't already established one. So this is required of utilities that are traditionally have done resource plans as well, and they might get this from regional resource adequacy organization. So they might just adopt those and list those here.
Oh, Blake.
Hmm?
That's it up. And here's Aaron, each one of these, we gotta zoom in a little bit on each.
Yeah, Blake with Ben Beauty again. I just wanted to test what I thought I heard you say. Maybe I wasn't paying good enough attention there, but I'll just describe my thinking. So as a utility that prepares a resource plan, my reading of that WAC rule you have listed there is it just points to another WAC rule, which is 210, which starts off that, if you're required to prepare an integrated resource plan, then you need to do this thing. So I read it as a resource planning utility would put not applicable in this section.
Well,
are you going to find that that's not true?
If you look at the bottom of 210, there's a requirement there. Let me see if I can.
Oh, okay. You know what? I think I see it. Yeah. So yeah, part 1 is the part I was talking about, but yeah, part 2 must identify the standard.
Yeah.
So can the standard be to rely on Bonneville Power?
Or
which is the reality?
The regional.
Or do I need to go to the extent of understanding Bonneville standard so I can tell you their standard?
I think that's a great question, Blake. We had Bonneville a part of the advisory group. And I'm not sure where we ended up landing on how we parse the methods of measurements and the resource adequacy standard, but last time Bonneville was able to provide some template language for these sections, and we can work with them. The get that so folks can have that ready. You know, they're also, I think Aaron was going to speak to, you know, if you're going to participate in the Western Resource Adequacy Program RAP, like you could use their standards and measurement methods here. But we do, I mean, I would expect folks to put in either what they're receiving under Bonneville or the RAP program requirements if you're a load following customer in these sections. Aaron, is that
Yeah,
tracking or?
yeah, that's what I was gonna say is if you're part of the RAP or planning on participating in the RAP, you could list those what you the standard that you would follow there and the methods of measurement there.
Yeah, it's just a little confusing. As a load following customer, we are not participating in the RAP, but Bonneville is participating in the RAP on our behalf, so we don't have to.
Okay.
So this one would just be a little more clear if there was just a simple drop down that says I'm a load following utility, I'm dependent on Bonneville, period.
Yeah, I
That's
think
just a suggestion.
I think we originally we were going down the path of creating drop downs, and some utilities kind of have their own thing or differing levels of resource adequacy standards. So they our advisory group kind of just wanted us to leave it more open rather than kind of confine us to drop downs. We had some questions around the RAP too, but they the utilities on the advisory group preferred to keep it more open and in case the RAP process was delayed and just give utilities more flexibility to report as needed as their situation calls for.
So perhaps we could build some of this into the guidance and maybe reach out to BPA and you can get some RAP template language that people could choose something like that so that in the guidance document we know what to do here. And maybe it's Aaron, maybe it's in the guidance document already, but it may help.
That sounds great. My utility was not in this position last time. We were not load following. So anything you did last time, I'm not familiar with. So having something from Bonneville would be great. And it would be doubly great if you provided it ahead of time. I didn't have to ask them for it. Thank you.
All right, yeah, that's something we can look more into and see if Bonneville has suggestions here, or maybe some of the utilities that are load following if they have suggestions here. All right, and then we have alternative compliance options. This is for planned use of alternative compliance options here. We just have the information laid out here. And then we have incremental costs here. We built it out a little bit more to provide a calculator for utilities, but utilities would have to provide detailed reporting as required by the rule. But we have a calculator here so that utilities can kind of just see the results of their CETA with CETA resource portfolio and no CETA resource portfolio and be able to calculate the incremental cost and see how that compares to the threshold.
And on both of these tabs, the alternative compliance options, we're in the interim compliance period where there's no standards besides the no coal standard coming into effect, but there's no clean energy standard. So we'd expect that to be blank. And then this incremental cost tab is optional. It's if the utility is claiming that they need relief from the statute because their incremental costs exceed what's set out in the rule, which I believe is like a 2% incremental cost cap. And so this is not something that I would expect folks to fill out. But it is there if you are interested in playing around with it, as well as if you do end up, thinking that you're exceeding that cap, we can put it in here. This tab to me, when I look at it first, I was like, oh, there's so many calculations and numbers. Do we have to do all of this work? And it's, no, you do not. But if you want to, you can.
All right. Well, that is all we have for the walkthrough. We'll leave any remaining time for questions, and then we can talk about next steps after that. Folks have any remaining questions or feedback?
I think they're all just eager to start going through it.
Austin, this is Steve Taylor, and appreciate being part of the early work group reviewing this. But I definitely think this is going to be of significant assistance to utilities. Gives us more certainty and clarity and how to prepare these plans than the last go around. So and Aaron as well, this is a tremendous amount of work that you put together here, and so definitely appreciate this.
Thank you,
No,
Steve.
appreciate you participating, Steve, with everyone. And I think as we said, starting out and going forward, as we're still looking to make sure that our the documents are clear and work for folks. So if they don't, if you run across something still, that's what we're using this next month to do, is to sharpen these and make them clear for folks. So if you have questions, comments as you go through it, let us know. Again, today was kind of just to orient everyone to all the different documents that are out there, and hope that it helps.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for all your feedback and the other CEIP advisory group members. We definitely responded to your needs, and it was helpful to understand your needs, what you needed with the checklist and other items as well. And it was helpful to clarify areas of confusion and really build out something that will be useful for you. So very glad to hear that it'll be helpful in helping you develop the CEIP. Alrighty, well, I will close us out. Just show the next steps here. I just posted these in the chat. The Smartsheet form is in the chat, and you can provide public comments until February 24th, 2025. And you can also access the draft reporting template and guidance materials on Box. And with that, thank you all for joining today, and feel free to submit your comments through the Smartsheet link. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
good rest of your week.